In the last video, we talked about Ddply a bit in the abstract. We didn't actually go into R, but in this video, we're going to go talk about the code and show you exactly what is happening when we split, apply, and combine with Ddply. So a refresher of what Ddply is, it's a way to, in just one step, it's a way to split up your data frame based on a factor, apply a function to certain elements of those factors, and then combine all those numbers back into its own data frame. Ddply replaces the functions split, apply, and combine to make it into one very simple but very powerful function. So what we'll be doing is we'll be using Ddply to manipulate a data frame and then subsequently graphing the new data frame that makes. So we're going to need histData, plier, and ggplot2. HistData because we're going to use the prostitutes data frame, plier because that's where the Ddply function is stored, and ggplot2 for when we actually graph the new data. So you should go through and run all these. And just to give you a reminder of what this data frame looks like, we're going to take a look. This is why I used the example I did in my previous video, because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be trying to find the mean number of prostitutes per year. So you can see in our data frame, we actually have 12 values for 1812, we have 12 values for 1813 in the count column, which is how many prostitutes there were in Paris. So we actually graphed this data set before, and if you remember, there were 12 points for each year, and it was a bit overwhelming. It wasn't the best. So instead of having those 12 points for each year, we want to just have it be 1 point, because that's going to make for a much more readable graph, something that's more useful to us when looking at the trend over time, instead of having all those distracting points. So the first thing I'm going to do is get the names of the prostitute data frame, just so we know the exact spelling of all the column names. And now I'm going to use Ddply to find the mean number of prostitutes per year. So I've written out the code that does this, and it's just this small line. When I run this, it's going to give me a new data frame, and it's going to only have one row for each year. So you can see that we went from having, well, you can see down here, 516 rows to having only 43. And the translation of this code is we've named a new data frame, which is average pro. We've said, all right, we want to save this into our new data frame. And we want our original data, which is the prostitutes data frame. We're going to split it by this variable. So that means that this variable was previously repeated a whole bunch of times, and we only want to get one back. So we want the mean of the number of prostitutes for every year. So translate it down here. We want a new column where we've applied some function to an old column for every one of these variables. So up here, what I've done is I've said, in this main data frame, for every year, we want to summarize, and this is going to be my new column name. I call it prostitute mean, pros mean for short. For every year, I want the mean of, and if you recall, count is the number of prostitutes, so I want the mean of the count for every year. So if we check this out, we can see that it's gone from having 5 columns to having only 2, and we've taken, instead of having 12 values for each year, we only have 1, so you can see we only have 1 1812, 1 1813, 1 1814, and it's taken the mean of all 12 months and put it into one row. And so now we have a much smaller data frame, which is much nicer to graph than this previous one. So you can see why this would be such an incredibly powerful tool to use when we're graphing, because instead of having to go through and do that calculation for every single year in that whole huge data frame, all it takes is literally one tiny line of code, and it runs in 2 seconds, and then you can look and graph it in this new form. And I don't want you to think that you can only do mean, or you can only split by one variable, or you can only have one new column. Ddply is really, really flexible. You can split by multiple variables, so I could have said, instead of just by year and month, if there were, say, 12 measurements for each month as well as 12 measurements for each year. So if there were more levels to the data, I could have said I want to split by year and month and something else. As it was, we didn't have any more variables to split by, but you can split by as many as you want. And you can use pretty much any mathematical function in your new columns. So I just did mean before, but you can say absolute value of one column divided by the other divided by 2, or the standard deviation of a column, or the mean of multiple columns plus each other. You can mix it up in any way that you want. And these are just a couple examples to give you ideas of what you can do, but really you can use any function, and that's the true power of Ddply. You can do calculations that would be very difficult to do individually in your data frame and do them all together in one line of code and get out a data frame with all the numbers you'll need in order to make a nice graph. In this video and the last, we've gone over exactly what Ddply does, how it splits, applies, and combines. And in the next video, we'll see how this is super valuable in graphing, because we'll go and actually graph our new data frame.